like I said, Stephen is an incredible person. He's living in Paris. He has come and talked to us twice now about moving to France and has made it seem really, really, really possible for people. So that is what we're here for. And Stephen, I will let you take it away and I will mute myself. And I'm very excited for all of you to be here.
What happened with the marker on the barcode? What was that?
You know, it's a feature of Zoom, and so people can do that, and I'm not sure what happened, but maybe somebody did it accidentally. I've seen it before.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. The third and final of these for 2020. Not quite in summer. I can tell you in Paris, we've definitely decided that it's autumn. It was warm until about 10 days ago, and it's been rainy and cold since. So it's definitely autumn. I saw a lot of Americans, even someone from Springfield, Mo, like dead center. And then I think I saw Brazil and the UK. So welcome, everybody. So the last couple times I talked about visa classifications, and I walked through how the major requirements required for each of those. And I think one of the things I stressed overall is the idea about French bureaucracy, and I'll repeat it here since this is our third and final, at least for this year, is the way that the French brain thinks is about a checklist. And so there's a very famous story in one of these expat memoirs that the guy went into Office Depot to like buy some ink toner, and he was trying to check it out, but the cashier said, "Oh, this is showing as out of stock, so I can't sell this to you." It's like, I understand, but the toner's right here, like I have it, it's clearly not out of stock. But like her brain couldn't process that since the computer said it was out of stock, she wasn't allowed to sell it to him, even though it was right there, right? But I think that's illustrative of how the French administrative brain works. The French administrative brain has a list of requirements. You have to match those requirements. And if you don't, like there's no customer is always right way to talk your way out of it. Americans feel like we can always sort of talk our way out of a situation. There's no way to talk your way out of a situation with the French, at least administratively. And I shared this, I think, on our last call. Stephen Clark very famously said in his very first book about the French, A Year in the Merde, which you might swallow your tongue laughing if you read sometime. But he said in the back of every French person's brain is a voice. The voice is saying, I am French and I am right. Okay. And if you understand that this is happening in the back of every French brain, then you'll understand this is how they work, right? I am French and I am right. And so that's how it works administratively. If you, I've seen like a disagreement somewhere. It's true. I'm sorry. It's so true. I've seen this myself. But I think that as applying to your nationality, visa, citizenship application, you learn this lesson, and most of us have not usually applied for a visa to go to another country. So we don't realize that not everybody can just easily come to some place. And part of that is just following what they ask you for. And they don't ask you for crazy, crazy things. So the first thing I wanted to lead off with, especially because last time there were so many questions about citizenship, is the idea of residence. And I just want to put it out to you as a possibility as we've watched things unfold over the last 6 and 7 months, that for certain parts of the world, residence has been treated equivalent to citizenship for the purposes of coming and going when it's come to COVID. In Asia, you've had to have citizenship to come and go. It didn't matter that you were permanent. I have a friend who's been a permanent resident. She works for the UN in Thailand. Wouldn't let her come back in when she left. She works for the UN, so she has a special light blue passport, which allows her to like pass through a lot of lines, and they were still giving her grief about it. So Georgia, I have a friend who's a permanent resident of Georgia, and they won't let him leave at the moment. Well, he can leave if he wants, but he won't be allowed back in because he's not a citizen. Whereas here in the European Union, and let's say broadly in the European Economic Area, residence has been treated equivalent to citizenship for purposes of coming and going. So that's what allowed me to visit the United States in July and then come back to France with no questions. So I just want you to think about the fact that whether it's France or elsewhere in the world, having a residence should be thought about in reaction to what's just happened. So if you're like, oh, I want to be a Thai resident, we'll say, how has Thailand treated its permanent residents during this time period? What would happen to you? I have friends who got accidentally trapped in Vietnam because they were there when the borders closed and Vietnam's not allowing anybody to come and go. So having a residence gives you more options, generally speaking. And it's given me a lot of options while I've been here. And that was something else I addressed on our last call. I was in Croatia at the time, right? So here I was, American, and I was explaining like Americans weren't banned from traveling to Europe. The question was where you were coming from, not your nationality. So even if a Brazilian was coming from the United States at the time, there might have been some restrictions. So I want you to think deeply about the idea of residence and not so much focus on thinking that citizenship is what you need to have the life that you want in terms of having options. The second was the COVID location test. I wrote an article about this yesterday on my blog, and I shared the idea for it on our last call, which is you've been told, all of us were told that we couldn't leave for a certain amount of time. How did that make you feel? Were you happy with how that made you feel? Why or why not? And use those feelings to engage with the idea of living where it is that you actually want to live. And if you're not doing that now, why not? And what can you do to change that? And I suspect some of you are on this call for that very reason. The last thing is reflecting on how the lockdown, so we had a very severe lockdown here for about 8 weeks. And a lot of us have thought differently about things since that time in terms of where we live, such that I'm actually looking at places out in the countryside to split some time between here and Paris, between a small place about an hour outside. It's still in Ile-de-France, but spending a bit more time in the countryside and some time in the city, again, with the idea of options, that you don't want to be in a situation where you only have one option if there's a lockdown. So with that said, the idea of thinking about residence as opposed to citizenship, thinking about the COVID location test. Am I living where it is that I really want to? Why or why not? And finally, that's changed things even for us here who are happy to live in France and happy to live in Paris, but we've still modified our plans a little bit. I'm happy to start taking questions.
All right, we already have a few, but feel free to type in your questions. So we have a question from Dana who's asking, how does the 2-week quarantine work if you don't have family in the country? Do you have to pack enough food for 2 weeks? I want to go, but I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to access food. Like, are you able to go to a grocery store first? Or do you have to go in a hotel and like eat their room service for 2 weeks?
Okay, so I'm only laughing because I'm thinking about like, where have you heard this? So I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the sort of fake news that gets circulated. The same sort of idea, the American ban. There was no American ban. There never was. I don't know if there ever will be, but there's no American ban at any time in the last 9 months. Honestly, the French are not big on the quarantine thing. I'll give you a couple anecdotal examples. The UK has twice imposed a 14-day quarantine on arrivals of their own citizens coming back from France. Both times the French threatened via the media that, well, you know, we are going to do something about this. And then they didn't. They proceeded to do absolutely nothing about it. Why? Because it would be an economic punishment to themselves. So they decided not to. So it was very, in fact, someone had sent me some headlines from, you know, the Daily Standard or other tabloids in the UK, like, oh, it's going to happen. I said, no, there's been no announcement. And then nothing happened. So despite the fact UK has a one-way quarantine on people coming from France, even their own citizens, we haven't reciprocated. I also know not only personally stories, but if you read lots of forums, people have been coming here for months now. So Americans just showing up at the airport and getting waved through immigration. And a lot of people have been going indirect ways. So they'll go to the Netherlands, which has been allowing Americans in, Germany, Croatia, and then taking another flight in. So I know at least 5 people who did that with no problems. They didn't ask what they were doing in France. I think partially because we have a bunch of students coming in now, because it's the school year starting, but partially because, as I pointed out to everybody, the EU merely issued guidelines. They're not laws. So there is no widespread EU immigration law that prevents people from coming into the EU. And that's why it was so easy for Croatia to allow a bunch of Americans in early in the summers, because it was simply a guideline. And so Croatia said, thank you for the guideline. Americans, please come. And we went. So if you were to come here, it depends on whether there's direct flights, but I'm only encouraging people to come in directly. So go to a neighboring country like the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland. Oh, no, Switzerland's really crazy right now. Germany or the Netherlands, and then just either take a train, bus, flight in from there, because they're going to assume that your last destination was inside the European Union. So this is not legal advice. If you're stranded, I will come and get you somewhere, okay? Happy to like put you up somewhere. But as far as I know, the strictness on not just American, but other travelers has gone swiftly downhill since June here in France. So you will not have to, even during the lockdown, we were allowed to go to the supermarket. In fact, the scam that all of us pulled here in Paris was we would say, oh, I need to go get milk. And then, later in the day, you're like, you know what, I need eggs. And then you'd go to a different market. It's like, I could really use some bread. And we just broke up what could have been one trip into like 6, so we could keep going out. And we go say, I'm going to go get bread. So we all invented reasons to go out during that time. Whereas I hear in different parts of the world, like it was, you had to get like food delivered, or it wasn't like that here. And we, I think, had the strictest lockdown in Europe. So.
Okay. Well answered. I know there's differences in what the media is saying and then what is actually happening on the ground. So thanks for clearing that up. I'm going to take these a little bit out of order just because I want to group them a bit. So Elena's asking, I figured out how to get into France on a short-term visa, but now I'm looking to extend it up to a year via the long-term 1-year visa. Can you apply for this while in France, or do I need to leave to apply for this?
This is an interesting question. So pre-corona, the answer was absolutely not. I've been hearing of some cases though. So what you have to understand is the French immigration structure is not monolithic. So for example, if you live down in Provence, for example, they are way more chatty at the prefecture than they are here in Paris, right? We're in the north, it's gloomy here, like give me your paperwork and get out. Like I've been told down in Provence, like they'll start chatting about like your kids for like 20 minutes. And then like, oh, let's get to your application. Why? It's the South. It's basically Italy, right? It's like olives, tomatoes, and like, everything you picture about Provence. So there's not a monolithic response to this. So I have been told anecdotally, so it hasn't been verified, but like friend of a friend has said that they have been trying to apply for, not for visitor, but for other visa classifications here. Now it's in process, meaning that means they were allowed to apply. They weren't rejected as is. So maybe their application won't be good enough, but it will depend on your department and will depend on the situation, because their understanding now, and again, this is what's been unbelievable about what's been unfolding with the administration. Things are happening now that would have never, ever been allowed. So for example, when you get your carte de séjour, which is basically your little ID card, you get a text message, you go down to the prefecture, you pay money, do it. They're sending these in the mail now. This was always like a security thing with the French, like, no, you have to prove it's you picking up the card. And apparently the French don't care about that anymore. And they're just mailing your cards to you. Why? They're trying to lessen contact. So if they're willing to change how they normally do business, it would seem that, well, I wanted to apply for a visitor visa for my home country, but it's not clear that any consulates in the United States are accepting visitor visa applications. And so you can say, well, I wanted to apply, but I can't, can I? I suppose the worst thing that you could do is try. So before this, I would have just told you, no, 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 like it's not possible. But honestly, like there's this thing called a recipice, which is your legal proof that you've turned in your dossier and you're waiting for your ID card. They're sending these to you for you to do by yourself. Like, I want you to think how silly this is. This normally prints out of a printer, and then they put your thing on, and then they put like a stamp of the city on there, and then they sign it. They're sending it to you for you to put your own photo on, and then like what, sign it yourself? It's crazy. That's a legal document that you're like self-executing now. So that's why I'm saying the worst thing that you can do is check out which department you are and ask, can I apply for a visitor visa from here, or do I have to go back to the United States? As far as I know, there's not a consulate in the United States that's currently accepting visitor visa applications, which would mean that you could apply a different way. If you're young enough, I talked about before the exciting au pair visa or a student visa. So they're accepting student visa applications. So remember that being a student doesn't necessarily mean like I'm taking 6 classes a week. It could be you're in a language school. It could be, and remember that university doesn't cost a lot here. So it isn't like you have to make a big financial commitment to be a student. On top of that, you're also allowed to work up to 24 hours a week. So you could even offset like the fact that you're going to school for a little bit of amount. So if you're blocked via visitor, then why not try being a student for a while? Even though I'm not saying fail your classes or pretend that you're not a student. I'm saying that it's an inexpensive, fairly non-stressful way to get in here legally, and they're accepting applications now. So,
All right. Even with the workarounds, I love it.
this is very French too. The French are like, if it doesn't go this way, the French will try to make it work another way.
Faye is asking, how many times can we get the 1-year extended visitor visa? For example, if I live in France for a year on a visitor visa and then leave to live somewhere else for a few years, can I apply to go back and live in France again for a 1-year extended visitor?
You can live. The 1-year visitor is renewable for an unlimited amount of time. And if you had previously had it, it's definitely in your favor when you go to make an application again. So if you had it and you didn't cause any problems, the French will say, oh, you already had one before. That will go in your favor. Doesn't mean you're definitely going to get it. But if you want to come and go, then you're, without going through the whole process again, you might want something closer to what I'm going to have in a couple months, which is the 10-year resident card. So the 10-year residence card allows you to be gone from France for up to 3 years consecutively. So you can have it, and then you can leave the country for 3 years, and then come back. But if you have it for a year and you want to go somewhere else and then you want to come back, you just need to go through the process again, meaning you won't get to apply in France. You'll have to go back to your home country and apply again. So once it lapses, you lose your renewal privilege, which is renewal is way easier than getting the visa in the first place. And you can do it in France.
Stephen, do you think you could go over what you said in parts 1 and 2, just so everyone knows that if they want like more detailed information, this is a part 3. This is like a, answering your questions from part 1 and 2. So can you say what they can find on patreon.com/nomadicmat? I'm going to put it in. So if you're really interested in all the nitty-gritty details, like you can go and do that, but can you sort of go over what you talked about?
Sure. So in both of the first 2 episodes, part of it, in this season, so in the previous 2 webinars, I talked about 4 visa classifications, and I talked about basic things that were required for every one of those visas, but then I talked about what was at the heart of each of those visas. So for example, with the au pair visa, the heart of it was, did you have a contract with a family? At the heart of the student visa is, where is your letter of enrollment? At the heart of your visitor visa is, do you have proof that you make the French minimum wage, or at least you have access to that money every month, if not for the entire year? And at the heart of the prof lib visa classification, which is what I have, can you plausibly build this business? Do you have the expertise to do it? And can you maintain yourself financially while it builds up? So there are other things that go along that are the same. In all the cases, you need to have a place to live. You need to, give them copies of different aspects of things. But at the heart of each of those visa applications is a particular thing that will make or break your dossier. So what I talked about there in those previous webinars was that the last webinar I got almost an hour's worth of tax questions. I was stunned afterwards, and I called my accountant and we had a good laugh about it. Because there's a question of tax residency. So the minute that you're here more than 183 days in a calendar year, you become a tax resident of this country. Now, being a tax resident is different from paying taxes, as it is in most countries in the world. Just because you have to file taxes doesn't mean that you owe taxes. But once you cross that line and you're here for more than 183 days a year, you're a tax resident, which means you have to file taxes. And I got a lot of questions about that. We even got into questions of renouncing your American citizenship because that's the only way you can get out of paying taxes to the United States. And the irony of that being for a country that was ostensibly founded on a tax revolt. They're effectively the only country that taxes your worldwide income as a citizen. But a lot of tax questions in the last episode. And then I think just in the first episode, there were some logistical questions about living in France. We talked about driver's licenses. We talked about finding an apartment, driving. People were shocked to find out what healthcare costs here. They were like crying about how inexpensive it is for school here. Trust me, I was crying too. I went to school in America, so I paid for that. So life in France. I remember, Erica, we were talking about like, what do things cost? And I was talking about the fact that it really depends. Like, do you want only organic stuff, or do you want conventionally grown stuff? Or that conventionally grown stuff in France is almost USDA organic standards. So even when the stuff's not grown organically in France, like organic standards in France are roughly, 35% higher than what American organic standards are. But it's not, let's say, expensive to live here in the sense of when I think of an expensive place to think, I think of New York City, Erica. I think of San Francisco. I think of Los Angeles. I don't think about Paris. We're not. The minimum wage in France is 1,400 euros a month. And you can very comfortably live here on, you can live in most places in France, but you can definitely live in Paris on 1,400 euros a month, all in. So, yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, I love that you're using the words episodes. We're definitely going to need to get you on like at least 4 more episodes for this season. But yeah, all of that can be found at patreon.com/nomadicmap. The replays are available. This replay will be available. So it's really useful if you want to reference everything he just talked about. And like I said in the beginning, Stephen has an unbelievable amount of knowledge, and the way he breaks it down is very easy. And then just before we go on, we did have a question, Stephen, about what kind of consulting services you do. I know you do this on the side for people that want to move to France, but can you just sort of explain that, just in case people are very serious and they actually want like very specific advice from you?
Sure. So I don't do this by myself. I have other colleagues who work with like families or married people or who has like special needs that that I don't. So my expertise is quite specific to Paris, to people in these certain visa classifications. So anywhere from looking over your dossier to make sure that it's acceptable, to answering all of your questions about those visa classifications. And if I can't answer them, I can connect you with people who do. So between me and 2 other people, I have every single visa classification covered, for France at least.
Amazing. Okay, now back to some questions. And you can find everything that you can contact Stephen via his email address, which is what, Stephen?
Oh, I'll type it in.
Yeah, okay. If that interests you. It's always good to have somebody on the ground, and we're really lucky to have Stephen as a resource in this case. He's proved himself to be very, very useful. Okay, so we have a question from McKinley, who is asking how much of the paperwork process of moving to France needs to happen before I arrive in France, and is it easier to do most of it after I arrive, especially since I will have a long-term place to live?
You mean when you say how much of it do I need to do after I arrive, meaning you have the visa when you arrive? Because you can't come here without a visa, shall we say?
So
Like,
coming on a regular visitor visa, I'm assuming it's a tourist visa. So then if she wants to move to France.
so I just want to clarify terms so it'll just be helpful for us. So the United States and the EU have visa-free access every 90 days out of 180. So strictly speaking, even though we refer to it as a tourist visa, and there's nothing wrong if you call it that, there is actually no visa required for Americans to come to the European Union. We get 90 days out of 180, essentially visa-free. You don't fill out any paperwork. You don't need to tell them where you're going. So if you're here on a tourist visa, what is called this 90-day visa-free access, you want to apply, you're going to have to go back to your home country. And as I said, right now, the ways people are making their way into France are not the official ways. So, and as I said in one of the very first answers, maybe they will allow you to apply for a long-term visitor visa from France, but it will depend. I think they're most likely to let it happen to somebody who got trapped here. So like they were here as a tourist in April, then they got stuck, and then they got stuck some more. And so they're going to say, well, you've been here since April, you can't go back to your country. Okay, I get that. But like, if you say like, I got here from Germany last week, can I apply? I think your path will look a little bit more suspicious. So just ordinarily speaking, and even now, you cannot just move from visa-free access to visa, normally speaking. Depending on your department, depending on your situation, it may be able to happen, but you'll have to find out.
So can you just clarify? So that's 90 days out of 180, and then at 181, you can go in for another 90 days.
Correct. So people will normally do visa runs outside Schengen. So this would be like the UK, or any of those other countries, and then you could come back, technically.
Okay, cool. And then June is asking, when it comes to the letter of interest in the Prof Leave dossier, do they need to also send an ID and a utility bill as proof that they are real? No.
No. Remember that for those who don't know, a letter of interest for your Prof Leave is you demonstrating to the French that you have people who are interested in hiring you. The French bureaucracy has no infrastructure to verify this. Meaning, if I signed your letter of interest, they're not going to call me and say, did you really say that you want to work with Erica on her coloring project? Like, they don't have the infrastructure to do that. So they can't, I'm not saying lie, but I'm saying that I like your thinking, because that's what the French would normally ask for, is ID, a utility bill. But in this case, a letter of interest isn't a contract. It's just saying, hey, I heard that you're starting a painting business. If and when you do get that painting business set up, I would like to hire you. It's not a commitment. It's not a contract. It's simply what it is, a letter of interest. So it's not binding on the individual. Your mother could technically write you a letter of interest. And it's not required that the person lives in France or even the European Union, although it is hard for you to argue, let's say, that you're going to be building a business in France and then all your letters of interest come from Thailand. So it wouldn't hurt to have some of those letters be from France.
Right. And then June is also asking, do you know how the process works to change from a Prof Leave status to a visitor visa, or not a visitor visa, but somebody that doesn't have that, or maybe the extended 1 year, is that what they're talking about?
I've never thought about that, but it should be fairly simple, because what you're doing is you're changing from a more complicated visa classification to a simpler one. You might get some questions from the French as to why you're doing that.
Well, so there's a bit more to the question. Just in case I decide to fold my business, but I want to stay in France, and assuming I qualify for that status, and then the follow-up is, would I need to go back to the US to do that?
No, because what you're doing is you're doing a change of status. Okay. So you're not obtaining a new visa, you're changing the current visa status. So again, which is a benefit that you have. Once you have a visa, you can renew it or you can change it. once a visa expires, you lose those privileges. So the French just might ask you, like, why are you doing that? Like, why did you decide to close your business? Maybe they want to encourage you a little bit, but other than that, you shouldn't really get any block. I've never actually had someone ask me about that before, but it is possible. It is possible to switch from prof leave to visitor.
Awesome. And then Sean is asking, do you know if owning a property helps with the residence and visa process? No.
If that did work, then people would be doing that all over the world. So the French are very happy to allow you. Anyone can buy property here. You can be a criminal. You can be whatever you want. You're welcome to buy property, but that doesn't help you with anything. And in fact, it's an administrative burden owning a property here. You're going to have to be compliant with the regular French paperwork for owning a property in France.
Okay.
So you don't get moved to now. I understand that question might flow from the 2 citizenship by investment programs that exist. No, 3 in the European Union. So Portugal, Malta, and Cyprus. Yes, in all of those cases, buying property not only can lead to residence, but can lead to citizenship. But all of those programs are under attack by Brussels. So I don't know how long they'll last, but they're outliers. Generally speaking, especially in Western Europe, property and investment is not any sort of help towards residency or citizenship.
All right. That is good to know. And then we have a question, a follow-up question. Did you say that you also help with people finding apartments in France?
I can help you find. So one of the things that you have to understand is apartments in Paris are a completely different question from everywhere else in France. So everywhere else in France, like my assistant's fiance told me he was looking for a place down south. When we say down south in France, it's anywhere south of Paris. We're very chauvinistic in that way. So like down south just means anywhere south of here. And he went to the town hall and he was asking about a property and they just gave him the keys. They're like, oh, go check it out, see if you like it, and then come back. And so finding an apartment outside of Paris is totally different. Here you can imagine there's essentially 15 to 20 people looking at each apartment that's average, less looking for student housing, fewer looking for very high-end housing. But let's say in the middle, there's 15 to 20 people looking at any given apartment inside Paris. If you're outside, if you're in the suburbs, it also becomes easier and cheaper. But there's lots of resources. Typically, just imagine that you're going to take a shower on your first one. Like if you don't know anybody, you're going to pay what I paid, like when I first came. Which is, I don't think I've shared this before, Erica. I lived in for Americans, 67 square feet, and that cost me 800 euros. But that's because I was paying the I don't know anybody tax. Once you have
67. Less than 100 square feet.
67. And then when you tell French, they're like, that's illegal. And I said, yes, I know. But
wait, did the bed fit?
It was futon. I know you're thinking it's really small, but it's like a large walk-in closet on the 8th floor with no elevator. But what you're doing is you're paying a tax for not knowing anybody. Generally speaking, when you want an apartment or you want to change apartments and you've been here and you have a network, you simply put the word out, say, I need, and then within a week, like you have a new apartment, because it just spreads out across your network and someone's grandmother was moving out next week. And would you like to go look at this place? Like, once you move to France, and Paris particularly, it's about your network. But there are lots of great. In fact, there's a Housing in Paris group. I can find it on Facebook and drop it into the chat. But it's got like 30,000 members.
I also want to say that one of your previous episodes had a lot about housing and all the resources for housing too. So if you are very interested in housing, patreon.com/nomadicmat, you can find that episode.
I love the suggestive sell. Very nice. Nicely done. So yeah, this one's got about like 30,000 members. I'm just going to drop that into the chat. But that's generally how you find apartments here, is you know people who know people, and then you get an apartment. Finding it on like Le Bon Coin or Craigslist, it's harder, it's more expensive, but sometimes this is the only way. I moved here, I didn't know anybody, barely spoke French.
And now look at you.
Like this room was like the size of that apartment, if I think about it.
I feel
So
like that's bigger than 67 square feet, but
I think it is too. That's
yeah.
what I mean is I think this is bigger than that place. So
Yeah, I mean, I thought I was living in a small place at 625 square feet, but
oh,
under 100 sounds crazy.
you're living the life at like with that size.
Wow. Okay, so Alda is asking if you get your master's degree in France and then get the work authorization and work there for a year, 20 hours a week, making 1.5 times minimum wage, like you said in the past Zoom meeting, you can apply for citizenship, right? Do you know how long?
After an additional year, right? So what it does is it cuts the 5 year residence requirement down to 2 years.
So you do a 1 year master's and work for 1 year.
Yes, and then you can put in your application. If you're applying from inside Paris, the current waiting period is anywhere between 18 and 24 months. And that's simply a processing thing. They have X number of people processing applications and X number of people submitting them. So it's not any sort of penalty. Whereas if you live in another department, maybe there's 3 people processing it and only like 6 people putting in applications and you wait like 6 weeks. So Paris, it's a question of just waiting. There's a long line ahead of you.
All right, great. Andrew's asking, can I work remotely my New York City job from France on a student visa? Is there a visa where I can do this?
Okay, so I repeat this is a recurring theme. There is no country that can stop you from having a remote job. Like it's not legally or morally possible for a country to stop you from working in another country in which they don't have any jurisdiction, right? So unless you live in a country that has gated internet like North Korea, there's no real way for a country to stop you from having a remote job. Having a student visa allows you to have an in-person job in France. And the hidden benefit of that, to counteract the bad wages that you're going to get, is network and building connections, right? So you're going to find more people that can help you with different things, and hopefully you can help as well. But you can have a remote job on any visa classification that you want. There's no way for the French to stop you from having a remote job.
Wonderful.
Legally or morally.
Burn that into your brain. Anywhere in the world, that's true. Okay, so Dana is asking, can you get a job teaching English now, or are they not doing school because of the coronavirus?
No, we're back to school. Teaching English, I would let you know, is it's an easy way to get a job here in terms of if you have the eligibility. Like no one's going to sponsor you to teach English, but if you're eligible to work in the European Union or in France specifically, it will be very easy to get a job as a native speaker, even if you don't have the TFL certification. So there's schools in Paris that will take you because as a native speaker, your qualification is so much higher than a non-native who has a TEFL, teaching English as a foreign language. So yes, it's an easy way to get a job. It's not a well-paying way to get a job, but it is an easy one. But it still assumes that you have the ability to work, which means you're either a student and you have the ability to work, or you have a prof lead and you work as a contractor, not as an employee. But
she also is following up right now. She is about to get her Italian citizenship and she's getting her TEFL. So
okay.
Would that make it easier for her?
Well, being an EU citizen means that you're allowed to work here. So that clears up that. And then getting a TEFL only qualifies you even more in terms of qualifications when you're applying. The biggest qualification for teaching English is being a native English speaker, from all my friends who are in that field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. I'm just gonna, I'm not trying to sell the Patreon, but this is part 3. So a lot of the questions that are coming through have been answered in extensive, the second part was 2 hours long. So we already have, I believe it was an hour and a half and then 2 hours. So we're on our 4.5 hour questions about this. So everything about visas is literally a PowerPoint in the first event, in the first
yes, because
episode.
Erica made me feel like, oh, I have to do a PowerPoint. I'm not normally, I'm old. I'm of a certain age, which means I grew up not being instructed at PowerPoint in school, right? PowerPoint wasn't invented yet. And so Erica's like, so do you have your PowerPoint ready? I'm like, PowerPoint. So like the night before I like put together a presentation to
That's
do it. It's not my natural thing to do, but yeah, if you watch the first one, it's all presented for you
awesome.
with everything. So
Yeah, and that goes over the visas. Then, like you said, there was an hour of tax questions. So these are like, if you're really interested, I highly recommend I mean, Patreon for $5, you can get this, and you can honestly cancel it after 1 month if you don't want to be involved in that. Like,
don't do it.
if that is all you want, like it costs $5 for the first 2 episodes and for this one. So if you're really serious about France, I highly recommend it. Okay, back to some questions. Andrew's asking, I'm interested in the French tech visa. What is the best way to find a French tech job? Is it difficult? And can you find companies to sponsor them?
So someone asked, so I have a Facebook group for my blog. So I have a blog called The American in Paris. And I write about my journey, you could say. And someone had asked about this in the community like 2 months ago. And then I ran across an article on French tech. So I'm just going to go pull it and I'm going to drop it into the chat because I haven't ever helped anybody with a French tech visa, but I know that there's quite a few cool things associated with it. Okay, here it is. I found it. So this is written by a guy who got the French tech visa. So that might have answers for you. Whoa. Does that work? Hold on. I think I know the problem is it's pulling from a Facebook thing, so it's way crazier. So let me.
It works. Don't worry.
It works?
Yeah,
okay.
It totally works.
Sorry about that. Like I was alarmed when I saw all of the text.
That's the worst, but it works. So if you want to click that, go for it.
Okay.
Great, thanks for the resource. From Doug, he's asking, given the French people's historical eagerness to revolt and strike, how successful can the government, including authorities, maintain a COVID lockdown?
All right, so that's a fascinating question and one that like makes me reach for a glass of wine, you know, to have this discussion with you. Okay, so prior to March, if you had told me the French were going to stay inside their houses for 8 weeks, I would have told you no way. But what I learned was the French and most other Europeans got paid off, right? So the French were on 84% chômage partiel. So the government was paying for almost everybody to stay home and watch Netflix. So what was the urge to revolt? Like there's no urge to revolt when the government's paying you to stay home. So I don't want to give the French any kind of credit for like, oh, we stayed home and we saved lives. They were getting paid to stay home, like most of Europe was. So I very much doubt, having lived here with these people for 7 years, there is no way that if there wasn't that you wouldn't have seen massive unrest. If people were not getting paid, businesses were not having their payrolls covered, you would have seen a lot of unrest. What's been happening, especially this last week where we got an announcement that bars have to close at 10 o'clock, was you're seeing political cartoons in which people are next to food and then it's like COVID is like fleeing, but like next to alcohol, like COVID was coming to you. So it's like the idea, it's like, oh, COVID's not going to get you at a restaurant, but at a bar, watch out. So the French are rejecting the sort of illogical procedure, which is, oh, well, bars can't stay open. And what's the reaction? If the French can't drink at a bar, they're just going to go to a restaurant and drink. It's not like we have a wall like, oh, restaurants don't serve alcohol. And so what you're seeing is the restaurants are starting to get packed because the bars are closing at 10 o'clock. So the idea is you don't want people to hang out. They're just hanging out at the restaurants. It's that the bars are a less powerful lobby than the restaurants, and the restaurants have been making their force felt in the last 8 weeks. So I think if you tell the French, like, this is why we're doing it, and it makes sense, they will generally do it regarding health reasons. But if you tell them that you can't drink at a bar, but you can drink at a restaurant, they're going to ridicule you. Now, as far as protests go, the Gilets jaunes promised like a big comeback on September the 12th, and like, I don't know, 5 people showed up. You know, it's like the French are like, you guys had your chance to like protest and then COVID happened. Like, we don't care about your crap anymore. So there are still people engaged with the movement, but it peaked last November. So it was never really a big, sorry, it was peaked the November before last November, when I think at the very first protest, there were like 250,000 people in the streets in Paris, and it's only ever gone down since. So the sort of rebelliousness about the French, I don't know, it's gone kind of cold. If you want to look at the history of the French, since the revolution, there's been 2 restorations of the monarchy, 2 empires, and 4 republics, including the first one, and a directory. But there hasn't been a new form of government since the Fifth Republic, which is younger than most people's mothers, right? It's post-World War II. So this is a very young form of government in France, and it's one that's extremely, the president is imbued with the power of the king. So people don't realize that among the presidencies of Europe or the heads of state, the French president can pass a law by decree. Do you know who is the only other person that used to have that power? The king. So the French can tell you that they don't like kings, but they certainly like giving the power to somebody dressed in a suit. So I don't know that the French are as rebellious government-wise as they used to be, but they're certainly rebellious to, let's say, social changes and that sort of thing. But that's not necessarily connected with the government. There's sort of larger questions at work about France and the French people. And the division between Paris and the rest of France, that's a pretty big deal as well.
I just love how you have such a great context for questions like this. Like, you really don't answer it yes or no. You're like giving all the anecdotes and all the reasons why it could be a yes or a no. So I really appreciate that. It's very valuable. Diana's asking, what's the mask wearing? What are people doing with masks right now in France?
So I have a friend who's a journalist who's been messaging me while I looked over and I saw something about masks. So I don't know if we have a new rule that's come down this afternoon, if she was at a press conference listening to that. But at the moment, the rule is if you're outdoors, generally speaking, you have to have masks on. If you're indoors, you have to have masks on. So you can only take your masks off here at home, right?
But not while you're eating or running.
Right. Well, again, this is the joke, like COVID flees when you start to eat food. Right? It's like, oh, like you're eating, I'm not going to bother you now. And everyone sort of understands it for what it is. Like when you're standing in line at a restaurant, you have to have your mask on, but when you're sitting down, like the virus won't bother you. Like, but everyone's sort of following the rules. That you wouldn't say there's widespread rebellion about it. In fact, widespread rebellion. There's not even like a little bit of rebellion. Like if I were looking at 100 people in the metro, maybe one of them wouldn't have a mask on and maybe they would be homeless. And we are not going to bug a homeless person about not wearing a mask. Like they have, let's say, larger concerns than that. So most people are wearing masks. I will tell you this, two ways to look at it. One, the French are accessorizing. So like the masks are starting to be real fancy. But if you go, there's a museum we have near d'Enfer Rochereau, called the Museum of the Liberation of Paris. And if you look, I think in the 1944 Paris Fashion Week, the girls from one of the couture houses had like gas masks as part of their thing, because the idea was, what if Paris gets like gassed? So it was like, oh, you need to have gas masks at home, but they made it as part of like the accessories or whatever. It's like, it's so typically French to like take a health item and then incorporate it into fashion. So the French have been accessorizing with these masks. So you'll see people, their mask matches their belt or something, and you're like, homie, I'm just gonna wear the like basic stuff. But it follows history. Like what they're doing is no different from what happened during the war, in terms of people taking what looks to be an emergency measure and trying as rapidly as they can to normalize it. The French don't want things to be abnormal, so they'll try to normalize something. Whether that's good or bad, that's a different conversation. But
All right. And then Liba is asking, what university do you recommend for people to study at in France? She or he is saying that this would be in like 2022, but something that's comparable to the US. Like, are all the universities comparable to the US, or are there a certain handful?
No. I would say, think about if I were to ask that question to an American, like, what's the immediate question that an American's going to follow up with? What is it that you want to study? How big do you want the school to be? Where do you want the school to be? So in France, the schools are competitive insofar as, yes, it's free to go to university, but that doesn't mean that anybody can go to any university you want to. You have to test. They're competitive for some of the best ones and for your program. So if you're an engineer and you want to go to this sort of school, like, the best schools are in different places. Like, one of the best engineering schools is down in Toulouse. No big surprise, Airbus is down there, right? So that means you're going to live in the South, which is awesome. Like, the South, I was just there 2 weeks ago. It's a beautiful part of the country. But when you're asking that question, you have to think it's just the same as the United States. What is it that you want to study? How competitive do you want the school to be? And remember, the equivalency thing, it'll just depend on what kind of career you're looking to get into. Is the career that you're looking to get into really strict on, like, oh, I see you have a French degree. Well, is that equivalent to such and such? As far as I know from my French friends who've gone to study in the United States, the question they've gotten from their employer is this a degree? Yes. They don't investigate, like, is this a master? In Europe, they have this thing like Master's 1, Master's 2, etc. Like, it looks like a college degree and Americans take it. Where you're going to get a roadblock is if you're trying to get into a advanced degree program in the United States. So you want to get to a master's or PhD program in the United States, they may then audit down and say, well, what kind of master's do you have from Germany? And then that will determine whether you can come into the program or not. But as far as getting a job, my French friends who've worked in America have said that they've never had any issue with their college degrees.
That's a great perspective to have. Yeah, there's a lot more questions around that need to be answered before that could be answered, but it's very, very insightful, your answer. Okay, so let's see. Faye is asking, do we need to file French taxes even on the extended visitor visa? Also on the 10-year visitor visa, or the 10-year visa, what's the minimum amount of time we need to live in France during the 10 years?
Okay, so to repeat what I'd said earlier, if you are in France for more than 183 days in a year, you are considered a fiscal resident, which means you have to file taxes. It doesn't mean that you have to pay taxes, but you have to file taxes. As far as the 10-year card goes, you're only eligible to get a 10-year card once you've been a 5-year resident, which means you've gotten the visa and you've renewed it 4 times, right? You also then have to take a language test. You have to have at least an A2 level. For those of you who don't know, the DELF levels go A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. A1 being Comment allez-vous, which, by the way, no one says in France ever. And C2, which is I can read Notre Dame by Hugo in the original, right? So you have to pass A2 in order to get your 10-year card. Once you have a 10-year card, you can leave France for up to 3 years consecutively if you want, or you could do 1 year here and 1 year here, 1 year here. But during the 10 years, you can be gone from France for up to 3 years, but not more than that. Now, obviously, there's no way for the French to know that you're gone, right? Like, there's not a tracking device that you're wearing. You could be gone, but you will still need to file taxes as if you are here, because they'll catch that you weren't filing taxes. So you could hypothetically be gone, but as long as you assert that you're a fiscal resident and you pay taxes as if you were, the French don't really care where you are.
Okay, good to know. Diana is asking, what's the middle range for housing in Paris? So let's say like Paris, 2-bedroom, 1
Hold on, right away when you said 2-bedroom, like, you're ritzy, like, you're fancy. Okay, so the average apartment in Paris, average size is 270 square feet. In American, we'd say 25 square meters. So that's the average size, and that is going to cost you roughly 750 euros a month.
Ooh.
So you can go smaller and pay less. You can go larger and pay more, but that is, if you go and read the articles, generally speaking, that's going to be your middle.
Okay. What about a 2-bedroom? What if we're looking at
that's Erica, you're talking fancy. So fair disclosure, I live in a 2-bedroom. So this is my room. I have a second bedroom, but I rent it out on Airbnb all the time. But altogether, this place is like 580 square feet, I guess. But to go back, Erica's like making these faces like I'm a crazy person. So
Well,
I want to point out.
580 euros.
No, sorry. 500. It's 580 square feet,
Yeah.
and anywhere between 13 and 1400 euros a month, depending on utilities, whether it's summer or winter. But I want to go back to what I'd said earlier, that I lived in 67 square feet for my first, and then I upgraded to like 87 square feet. But my first 2 years in Paris were on the 8th floor of a building that was essentially a generous American walk-in closet. But what I found about that was just how little you actually need to live. And in America, we're just used to having space to have it. Like, we're really blessed, cursed, you can look at it either way, but it means that you don't ever have to think about anything in terms of buying. I remember this was my 3rd year in Paris, and I was living in a bigger place at this time. It was like 440 square feet. I felt like a king after like the last place, right? And I'm in line holding a blender because I was like, smoothies are on, baby. I'm in a big enough place now. And as I'm moving up towards the front of the line, I'm visualizing where on my countertop this is going to go. And I realized, like, I don't have room on my countertop for this. I was like, well, I'm not going to put this I'm not going to put it away and like take it out every time I need it. I'm going to potentially use this thing every day. And I was like, well, I guess I can't get a blender. And I left. I literally left the blender at the checkout. I said, je ne veux pas, and I left. And it's weird to make decisions based on space. You're like, I don't have space for that. In America, we never have to think this way. And so we accumulate stuff like you wouldn't believe. And then you're like drowning in all this stuff. And it's because we're not forced to make hard choices. And when you live in 67 square feet, I promise you, you will never look at stuff the same way again. Yeah. Like I accidentally got tiny homed, right? Like there are tiny homes that were bigger than my first place. And after that, like now that I live in 500, I feel like a king. Like an emperor, actually, living in 570 square feet. And keep in mind, my last home in America was like 1,400 square feet. It was a townhome, like a 3-story townhome. So I really wish that for people. I wish that they could live in someplace smaller so they could realize, like, you really don't need all this crap. Yeah. I'm not saying you all need to live on the 8th floor of a Parisian apartment in 67 square feet, but I promise you it wouldn't hurt you as bad as you'd think.
It's making me feel good because I am pregnant right now and I live in 600 square feet with my husband who also works from home and we are freaking out. So
just think, Erica,
context right now.
You can just tell him we'd be baller status in Paris.
Oh, amazing. Okay, so now we have a question on healthcare costs. Oh, I also wanted to say, I get what you're saying about this small apartment thing because also you're in Paris. So who wants to actually be in their apartment? Like, I'm sure you're out all day, right?
But it's like that. It's like, I was just saying, like New York, San Francisco, a lot of the thing is like, well, who needs your own yard when you have like the Luxembourg Gardens or like Butte-Chaumont, this sort of thing, that we think about our living situation differently. It still needs to be comfortable and cozy. Don't get me wrong, but we have we have cafes and we have gardens and we have all those things to supplement our rabbit hutches, as they may be.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, now Doris is asking, how are the healthcare costs covered on an extended visa? Do you buy personal insurance covered by the government program, or is there something else?
So just to correct the wording, remember extended visa, I'm assuming you mean the long-term stay visa. Yeah. Well, they're not covered by the government. They're covered by you, but you'll be surprised to know that you can get comprehensive foreigner insurance for like 400 euros a year on the low end, and maybe up to 600 euros a year on the high. I know, Erica, I know. Like try not to think about it, but you have to cover insurance as part of your visa application. So you have to show that you have it. I've shared before in previous episodes about Cigna Global. Depending on what deductible you choose, like it can be higher or lower. I think when I first came, it was like $25 a month, but I canceled it as soon as I got here, and I switched to like a French assurance étranger, which was the 400 euros. But now I'm in the healthcare system because I have an entrepreneur visa. So I don't want to, I think I shared before when I paid, and like I saw the agonized looks on some people's faces. So I didn't know if I want to share, but let's just say I don't pay a whole lot for French
Just
insurance.
share like one or two numbers.
So there's no pre-existing condition, but keep in mind, it's a small country. So you can't compare France to the United States. You can compare France to like Massachusetts, New York, Texas. You can compare France to a state, but you can't compare France to the United States. That's not a fair comparison. But there's no like limits, there's no lifetime limits or whatever else. When you go to a doctor, you're going to need to pay something. You have a health insurance card and it scans in. So let's say I went to my dentist a few weeks ago. I paid 60 euros. And some French people be like, oh, 60 euros, but he's an English speaker. So bilingual ones sometimes charge more, but the French will then rebate 70% of that directly into your bank account. And then if you have top-up insurance, your top-up insurance will rebate the remaining 30%. The top-up insurance is there if you are someone unlike me who goes to the doctor a lot, because the cost of the top-up insurance may be more than the actual top-ups, right? So if you have top-up insurance and you go to the doctor once a year and you get reimbursed your 25 bucks, but it costs you 400 for the insurance, like that makes no sense. But if you have a condition, any sort of thing in which you go to the doctor fairly often, you should get the top-up insurance. It'll save you some money. For someone like me, who the last time I went to my doctor was like right after the deconfinement here, and she had to go look for my file in her archives, and she was telling me in French, she's like, "Oh, I thought you moved." I was like, "I'm not good about going to the doctor." Like it'd been like 3 years since I'd seen her. So there are plenty of people like me, even though we've got great access to healthcare, that we don't necessarily use it. So. I wanted,
Nice.
Eric, I want to take remember last time I took a travel break because this is the Nomadic
Sure.
Network, and I want to share a cool travel story. So I went to um, several places this summer. So I went to America, but I also went to Croatia, the north this time. I'd been in the south of Croatia, like Dubrovnik and Split, but this time I was in Zagreb and I went to Plivice. And when the lady told me, the ticket lady told me it was like 75% less than normal. And I cannot imagine what it would be like under normal conditions at that national park, which is one of the really most special national parks in that part of the country. I then also went to Mallorca, same sort of thing. There's this beautiful cave on the east side of the island that's very beautifully laid out. And I talked to the ticket lady. She's like 50%. And then I was in Andorra a couple weeks ago, which was the last of the micro countries. So those of you who don't know, there's 6 micro countries in Europe: Malta, Liechtenstein, San Marino, the Vatican, Luxembourg, and Andorra. And so this was the last one that I hadn't been to. And I really like it. Andorra is beautiful. It's a ski resort disguised as a country. Or like a duty-free shop disguised as a country. But it happens to be like literally in the Pyrenees between Spain and France. And the government switches between the Bishop of Urgell in Spain and the French president every 2 years. So it just changes like that. But it's also, I talked to the lady at the hotel, like she's like, it's 25% of what it normally is. So I'm working on an article for Erica about this, but the idea of feeling hyper privileged at the moment to travel, and how that makes you reflect on previous travel when it was hyper easy to travel. As someone who's been traveling a lot this summer, that's really hit home with me. And if we had more time, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it as well, because I think it's an interesting conversation. But I'm certain that other people who've traveled in the last few months have felt as privileged as I have, because it's been weird. It's been really, really weird. And it's made us ask if we actually do want things to go back to normal. And I'm not just saying that because I see a lot of these sort of snotty, like I saw this article, the Dutch were like, we got our city back in Amsterdam. And it's like, dude, nobody forced the tourists on you. Like, you were very happy to take their money when they were there, right? So cities always have choices about like what they want to do and how they, so if cities decide, if Venice decides they're going to change things, if Barcelona decides, that's great. And I think all of us could do well to reflect on how we've traveled prior to March of this year and how we'd like to travel in the future. And I think that should happen. We happen to have an opportunity to do that forced on us, but that doesn't mean it was a bad thing. I'm not endorsing necessarily any of the measures that happened, but it doesn't need to be bad. We can take it positively. And I think we've been given an opportunity to do that.
Okay. Thanks for the travel break.
Back to the questions.
Back to the questions. All right, Susan's asking, is there a length of time you must prove your place that you live to be able to get the long-term visa? And then once you're there and you have your visa, can you move to different places?
Sure, but you're going to have to register because you're going to get mail at that address, and that's where you're going to renew. So you renew your visa based on your address. So if you move out of Paris, like, you're going to renew at a different department. So you have to register that. So you really only have to have your address to get the visa. If you then like move to France and you change your address immediately, that's fine. As long as you tell the authorities, you're fine. I'm not saying you need to, like, you don't want to move like 3 or 4 times in the year. But don't worry that you don't like where you live and that you're stuck. Like, it's just an administrative thing to get your visa. The French are indifferent to where you live. Honestly, they're just checking a box like, oh, do you have proof that you live here? Great, next thing. Like, they don't care. They're not gonna be like, so did you talk to your landlady? How's the heating? Like, does it have electricity? Like, they don't care, right? They just want to know that you have an address and you have legal proof that you live there.
All right. And then a nameless person is asking, my husband and I have been accepted into a French language immersion program. It lasts less than 90 days, which according to the French consulate website is a legitimate reason for us to enter at this point in time. Do you think we still need to fly to France indirectly, or will we be okay flying directly?
If you have the certificate of enrollment, I feel like you would be, but I feel like you would be. The certificate of enrollment, because normally you would want to apply for a student visa, but since it's less than 90 days, fewer than 90 days, it should be fine.
Okay,
it should be fine.
Great. Let's see. Donald is asking, I'm gonna butcher this word. What arrondissement?
Arrondissement. You can just say district.
Arrondissement do you live in?
I'm in the 19th, the sort of quiet right-hand corner. I lived in the 17th for my first year, which is mostly filled with let's say the elderly. And then I lived in the 2nd, which would be like living on like 63rd and 2nd, to put it in Erica's like really cool part of town. So I was living in the 2nd for 3 years. So I'm at the moment contemplating a move into the 11th, which is like, I don't know. Again, I think of Erica, I'm thinking of like Bush Stye or like some like trendy part of New York. But the 11th is gentrifying at the moment, but it's also where some of the most exciting cuisine and cafes are. It's just a really cool part of town at the moment. So the 11th is now what the 18th was like a couple years, like maybe like 10 years ago. And the 19th is coming that way too, but more slowly.
Oh, very cool. Carol is asking, do you foresee a collapse of the EU anytime soon?
Another great philosophical question. I think the challenge is you're facing multiple threats at the minute. So for those who are unfamiliar, and I don't want to get too deep into this because again, it's beyond the scope of today's webinar, but there are multiple pressures the EU is going through and that predate COVID. So one is the euro itself. So Croatia, when it was admitted, was on the path to having to adopt the euro, and this put strains on its economy that weren't expected. And there's been problems with Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal regarding the euro. So prior to this, we already had a problem with money. We also have a governance problem. So the Macron-Merkel bloc of the EU want a federal, essentially Europe, in which national elections are meaningless And we operate more like the United States, where there is a president of Europe, and then there are sort of governors of the various states. The Visegrad countries, represented by Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland, because they fought communists for many years, are not eager to be subsumed into a European superstate for their own reasons. So they represent the anti-Merkel-Macron argument. So there's a federal issue going on in Europe. There is a money problem going on in Europe. Now COVID, there's an aid package that's being held up by the Visegrad countries at the moment. The bailout package is being held up by those countries because for their own political reasons. And then you have immigration challenges within Europe. So we have security issues with the Turks at the moment. So Macron wants a European army, which would cause problems with NATO. So philosophically speaking, when I talk to young people here who've been born and lived their entire lives in the EU, I remember having this conversation with a Danish girl in New Zealand. And she says, I don't think the European Union is going to last in its current form. So like, it can't last the way that it is. It's going to have to change somehow. So that's someone who's grown up her whole life in the EU. And that's generally what I hear from people under 30 is this is not sustainable. However, never say something isn't sustainable when there's a lot of money tied up with it continuing, right? So it would be very hard to come off of the euro, even though it would be very good for some countries. There'd be nothing wrong with necessarily having a European army, but that's going to cause a lot of friction with NATO. So the changes that, let's say the medicine might be more difficult than the current disease for people. So do I think the EU will be around? Yes. Will it be in the same form? Probably not. But it doesn't mean that it will be drastically different because it's such a big institution. It's so lumbering. You don't just end those things overnight. Even when the Soviet Union dissolved, like it took a long time for that to shake out. So I don't see it ending tomorrow. I guess that's my short answer, following my philosophical answer.
Got it. I love these philosophical answers. We have another question from McKinley saying, just curious, but if everyone is wearing masks, this was when we were talking about the coronavirus, if everyone is wearing masks inside and outside, why do you think the coronavirus numbers are rising so much at such a steep rate in France as compared to, say, Italy?
Well, remember so there's, okay, 3 disclaimers. I am not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a government official. So I'm just providing you with feelings on the ground and talking to my friends in Italy and other places that they had it much worse than we did early. So there's this idea like, oh, they went through their really crap time and now we have to go through our crap time. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is no matter, the biggest rising number is cases, not hospitalizations or deaths. Like, yes, there are some movements in that way, but they're not going like this. Our cases are going like this, right? But our hospitalizations look more like this, and our deaths look something like this. So I think the media would have you believe like people are dying in the streets now, and all it means is our case numbers are through the roof. But again, the scientists like don't have a acceptable explanation as far as I'm concerned. Like if the idea is it's readily transmitted by asymptomatic carriers, like, okay, well then everybody should have it and we should be dying in the streets. But our cases are way up, but the hospitalizations and deaths are not proportionately so. So yeah, it seems like our cases are way up, but really there's not been a satisfactory explanation from the government or medical authorities as to why this is the case. And again, the French are like happy to do whatever. You just have to tell them why it's happening. That's why I said this, the bars closing at 10 p.m. was so incoherent. And it was done without coordination with the local mayors. So like the mayor of Marseille, she found out on the press, like as the press conference was happening. And she tweeted about it. She's like, basically in French, she's like, thanks for letting us know. But she like found out at the press conference. So if you tell them why it's happening, I think they'll listen. But if you don't tell them why, they'll just sort of be French and do their own thing.
Michelle is asking, is it potentially because there's more available testing that there are more cases?
Possibly. But it's not necessarily easy to get a test. Yes, the French government is now not charging you. So I paid $25, I think, right after deconfinement to get one. But even at the bottom of my test, it said, this does not mean that you did not have it. So
Right.
Yes, more testing can account for more numbers, but we're not doing enough testing to necessarily account for that jump. But again, if society is moving, normally speaking, you should see some movement. The idea that the cases should stay stagnant while people are allowed to move around is crazy, right? Of course, cases are going to rise, but I think that goes back to the question of Macron, when we deconfined, he talked about the stage of living with the virus as opposed to trying to save the hospital beds. So he's tried to make it very clear, we're moved to this next stage where it's like, we're not worried about hospital beds anymore. We're trying to figure out how do we live on a daily basis, knowing that it's going around, because the idea can't be anymore that we're going to stop it, right? It's spreading, but how do we manage it so that there are hospital beds available without going into another lockdown? He knows it's very politically risky for him to have another lockdown. So he doesn't want to, if he can avoid it.
Got it. All right, well, we're at an hour and a half. And I just wanted to say thank you to Stephen. And Stephen, do you have anything else you want to share?
I have usual goodies, right? Yeah. So as I have for the previous 2 webinars, I'm going to do it for this 3rd one as well. I have a coupon code for 100% off any one of my 3 courses. I have 6 courses in total, 2 on French immigration, but 4 on other things like there's a travel one, there's one on how to be a meetup host, how to be an Airbnb superhost. And I've been giving those courses free to anybody who's made a contribution. So if you're already a Patreon member, you can just email me and I'll give you the coupon code, just send me a receipt. Or if you decide today to make a one-time contribution, as Erica showed you with the marker barcode, you can make a contribution, send me the receipt, and I'll send you a coupon code. And then anyone who's here, you can have 25% off of my French immigration courses, either to get the long-term visitor visa or the Profession Liberale, the Prof Lib visa. Yeah. So as long as you made some contribution, I would like to give back to Nomadic Matt and that community. I think they're pretty awesome. And it's my little way to give back for having them ask me to come on.
Well, we think you're awesome too, Stephen. We really appreciate this. I can't believe you've been here 3 times, almost 5 hours of information on moving to France, and very thoughtful answers to your questions. And like I said, there's a PowerPoint in the first one, and you've really put it into layman's terms, like how to move to France. I'm definitely thinking about it. So I'm very happy to have all of this information. Like he said, if you want any of that access, and Stephen's classes, his online courses seem amazing. So 100% off sounds pretty awesome. Patreon.com/nomadicmatt. And that's also where you could find the previous episodes, or a one-time donation to PayPal, matt@nomadicmatt.com. That would also qualify you for the free courses or the 100% off. Before we go, I just want to touch on the Nomadic Network and what we're up to. Like I said in the very beginning, we have 23 events on the website right now that are upcoming, and we are very excited about them. And so basically tomorrow we're having Matt is actually going to be hosting an interview with Lola, who is an insane photographer. She works for Nat Geo. She has taken photos all over the world. She's incredible. And she's going to teach us how to sell our travel photography. I'm not sure who's writing on the screen, but okay. And then next Tuesday night, we have Emma, who's going to teach us all about Singapore, and she's been living there for a while now with her family, and so she's going to sort of tell us what are some cool off the beaten path things to do, what we need to know before we go, and it's going to be a really awesome event. I'm excited for that. And then on Wednesday, we have Cassandra from Travel Italian Style, who has lived in Italy part-time for the last, I believe, 12 years. She lives there for 6 to 8 months a year, and she's gone to every corner of Italy. And so she's going to be sharing a ton of photos. and where to go to in Italy that'll just make you feel like you're a local. And then on Thursday, we have Sanjita, who is actually helping me out with the TNN Instagram, and she is going to teach us all about India from a local tour guide's perspective. She's going to go over a lot of commonly asked questions. She is a tour guide in India. She's not working as a tour guide while there's no tours because there's hardly any tourism right now. So she's excited to sort of teach our community and give back in that way. And then last in the upcoming ones is the world's quirkiest diving destinations, which if you don't follow Alexandra from Alex in Wonderland, she is one of my favorite travel bloggers on earth, and so she is just an incredible person. She runs diving retreats all over the world. She's dove all over in all the depths. It's not something I would do, but it's something I love to watch her do. And so if you're a diver, please think about joining us for that. These are all free events, by the way. We put them on just to keep our community engaged in this whole travel experience while we can't travel right now. And so we're really excited to be able to offer this, and they're free for anyone. So if you know somebody who likes to dive or wants to go to India or Singapore or wants to sell their travel photography, please share the events with them. We are more than happy to have guests come and just see what we're all about. And then the last thing I'd like to say is thank you so much for being a part of our travel community. This is an extra long event. Stephen, thank you so much for coming and talking to all of us and sharing with us all of your knowledge. And to the community, I really appreciate you being here. It makes it so much fun. You know, if Stephen just answered my questions, it wouldn't be that exciting. But you guys brought all your A game with the questions, and if you end up moving to France, please let us know, or anywhere in Europe. Like, we'd love to know if this actually happens and you're able to do it, because, you know, we love to know that we can make a difference. Like, these are really, we create these for you, for our community. So thank you for being here. Stephen, did you want to say anything?
Someone had asked, I just posted the website, so theamericaninparis.com, where I talk about some of my adventures, perspectives on French life, and then my email address, stephen@thelifeyouwant.eu. So I posted both of those below. If for some reason you missed it, just email Erica if you don't get those, and she'll get that to you. But thank you all for joining. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to every question. As always, it's sort of a race against the clock, and Erica is monitoring everything and trying to get as many questions answered as we can. But I appreciate all the questions, and again, I wish for you all to really think about where it is that you're living, why you're living there, and if you're not living the life that you want to live, why aren't you doing that? Make sure that you do.
So inspirational. Love that send off. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Stephen, and have such a great day or night wherever you are. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Bye, everybody.